Good morning, everyone, and I want to thank you all for joining the webinar. This is Heather Creven from Nebraska Recycling Council, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Nebraska Recycling Council is a statewide, member-based, charitable nonprofit supporting collaboration between communities, businesses, solid waste, and recycling industries to improve recycling collection and infrastructure. Our mission is to maximize the economic and environmental benefits of resource recovery in Nebraska. In this webinar, you will learn about BarFly Ventures waste diversion program and how they strive to compost and recycle up to 90% of their total waste stream, including the products that they use, staff training and education, their initiatives to protect and conserve fresh water, and engaging their green teams. Autumn Sands, Sustainability Manager for BarFly Ventures, the parent company of Hobcat, will be our presenter today. BarFly Ventures owns and operates 17 bars and restaurants and breweries in 14 cities, including one in Lincoln, Nebraska. Autumn is native to Michigan with a passion for sustainability, natural systems, regenerative agriculture, building healthy soil, and protecting fresh water. After spending 9 years working in the hospitality industry, Autumn created the BarFly Sustainability Program, focusing on how the company can have a positive impact on the local environment and community through resource recycling, advocating for clean water, energy, and water conservation, supporting local farms and gardens, educating staff on these initiatives, and uplifting local organizations with similar goals. Autumn is also a founding member of the Great Lakes Business Network, the Michigan Organics Council, the Michigan Brewers Guild Sustainability Subcommittee, My Green Michigan, the West Michigan Food Recovery Council, the local First Restaurant Sustainability Subcommittee, and the Grand Rapids 2030 District. BarFly Ventures is the parent company of Hobcat, Stella's Lounge, Grand Rapids Brewing Company, and the Waldron Public Health. Their mission statement is to care about the environment and the world around us, treat each other like family, offer a unique dining experience, and make sure each and every guest feels important. During the webinar, please type your questions in the chat box as they come to mind, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. A recording of this presentation will be available following the webinar on our website, www.nrcne.org, under the Resources tab on the Webinars page. Thank you again for attending this webinar, and as I turn the presentation over to Autumn Sands, there will be a slight delay before she begins.
Hello, everyone. This is Autumn. Thank you for being here today. I just want to apologize in advance. I'm getting over a bit of a head cold, so bear with me. But I'm really happy to be here. This is my first time hosting a webinar. I've attended several in the past, but first time hosting. So thanks for being here. So I started with the company about 5 years ago. And I started as a bartender at the Grand Rapids Brewing Company. And I had worked in the hospitality industry for almost a decade at that point, bartending and serving. And I always noticed how much waste the hospitality industry, particularly restaurants, how much waste we produce as an industry. And as a bartender, having to personally give away hundreds, if not thousands, of plastic straws on a daily basis always really kind of weighed on my conscience. And I tried to bring up ideas to previous management and companies that I worked for before BarFly, and it never really went anywhere. It was kind of just one ear in one ear and out the other. And it was definitely a source of frustration for me, just having to see all of the waste go out the back door every night. And I just knew that there had to be a better way to do business. And when I started with the Grand Rapids Brewing Company, 2012, I noticed that one of the very first things I noticed, they were starting to source compostable straws. And I had never seen them before. It was a new idea. And I was really fascinated by this. I started doing a lot of research on that product line and found that there were a whole list of compostable products that were available to our industry, to restaurants and bars. So that's kind of where my sustainability journey began. And I'm gonna switch slides here. So over the last 5 years, it's developed into a much larger program. And I started kind of categorizing different projects or ideas or initiatives into these 5 categories. And I'm going to talk about mainly waste today, a little bit of soil and food, a little bit of community and collaboration. And I don't know if we'll have enough time to cover the water and energy aspects, but can definitely speak to those as well. So when we started training our staff on our waste diversion program, and still today, we're really just asking this question of when we throw something away, where does it really go? And I really like this slide, using this slide in training and kind of looking at Earth from this perspective. I don't think we often get the opportunity to see Earth in this perspective. So it's definitely a humbling experience to think about the fact that every material that was ever manufactured, every piece of plastic, every plastic straw, everything on this planet is still here in some shape or form. So when we talk to our staff about waste diversion, we really hone in on the fact that there is no magical place of away. Everything has to go somewhere. And so most of the time, and in majority of the areas that we're located in, majority of our waste produced would most likely end up in a landfill. And when we talk about landfills with our staff, we also like to show this slide as well, and really kind of break down the fundamental idea of a landfill. And when we think about it, it's really quite silly. It's a huge pile of all kinds of waste that is just sitting there rotting and releasing chemicals and methane and leachate and all kinds of other things. And it's not sustainable as a practice. And it's really quite disgusting. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a landfill, but to me, it's just not ideal. So we started asking the question of how can we change this? How can we move away from this and not contribute to this idea? So one of the things that we talk to our staff about in training is why we don't want to throw things into the landfill. And one of those reasons is because the materials could last a very, very long time within our environment and not break down, not turn into another product or something that is actually useful, but rather just sit there. So a couple examples that we throw out, diapers could last 500 years, or plastic bags 1,000 years. Plastic bottles have been estimated to break down into tiny little pieces and potentially last in our environment for up to 1 million years. And I think that there's definitely a lot of research on this, but at the same time, a lot of these materials are relatively new, maybe 100 years old or so, and we don't really know exactly how long they're going to last when they're just thrown into a big pile. So we decided that we wanted to move away from that practice. And we also show these types of images in our training because we just really want to inspire thinking outside of the norm and realizing that we are all contributing to us in some way in our daily life. When we go to the store and buy, a bottle of water or a Coke or a Sprite, we may not think about where that ends up and what happens to it. And on a global scale, a lot of our waste, if it's not ending up in a landfill, a lot of it, unfortunately, is ending up in our waterways. And it's estimated that about 6 million kilos of plastic are washed into our waterways or dumped into our oceans every year. And so this is really starting to add up. And again, these are images that we show to our staff in training when we talk about waste diversion, because we really just want to drive the point that this is something that we are consciously choosing to not contribute to. And so this is essentially a plastic island in the ocean that is consistently getting bigger. And obviously there's a lot of problems with this, and one of the biggest ones is that it's starting to end up in our food chain. And so when these plastics break down, they are consumed by smaller animals and fish and birds, and it's working its way through the entire food chain. And there's a whole lot of research and studies on that, but we won't go into that too much today. So the moral of that story and kind of the culture that we're trying to create within our staff and within our company is just, don't be trashy, essentially. And it started kind of as a joke, this motto, but we're putting in the work to actually make it very serious and something that we do on a daily basis, something that we remind ourselves on a daily basis is just, let's not be trashy. So when we started, we really just started from the bottom. And this is a photo that I took 2012 when I first started doing my waste audits and going into the restaurants and into the bars and taking photos of the trash cans, as nerdy as that is, and just trying to figure out what materials we were actually purchasing and then sending back out into our environment. So this is a photo of the transition of, instead of having everything in one bin, let's try source separation and separating these materials into 3 different bins and seeing how much we have at the end of the day that cannot be recycled or composted. And so our color coding system company-wide, for the most part, blue is always recycling. The middle one is a green Slim Jim with a green compostable bag. And then the one on the left there is actually a 5-gallon orange bucket that in most cases is our landfill container. So we tried that out. And this was the first day, this is a photo from the first day that one of our chefs proved that this could be done. And at the end of his shift, he's taking out his trash, and within that orange bucket is all of the trash that he produced. And what we found was that about 65% of our entire waste stream is recyclable material. Within our restaurants and bars, we go through a ton of cardboard, all of which can be recycled. And when you're starting to analyze your waste stream, I think a lot of businesses will find that cardboard is the bulk of their waste stream. And cardboard is also a pretty valuable material to recycling facilities and also the easiest material to start separating. So that's always, I would recommend, the best place to start. And other recyclable materials like paper or glass or metal, plastic, mixed in with the cardboard, that makes up about 65%. The compost, and I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go, but the compost is about 25% of our total waste stream, and that leaves us with 10% or less that actually goes to the landfill, or in some cases the incinerator. And those materials generally are latex gloves, styrofoam, which we don't really have too much of, the styrofoam. We've been able to eliminate the majority of that. Every once in a while, chip bags or candy wrappers or saran wrap, materials that cannot be recycled in a small volume. And in some areas, juice boxes are not recyclable through our service. And so that's, and dustpan contents when we sweep the floor and we have, pieces of broken glass and dirt and things like that. But that's pretty much it. And so we've been able to narrow it down to a few select items that cannot easily be composted or recycled through our current service. So with that, this is an example of some of the signage that we use. And up in the left-hand corner, that's actually the first beer that we started distributing. It's called Beer Right Meow. And we put it in cans because we found that cans are actually more valuable and easier to recycle for most facilities that we work with. And so between the cans, the jars, our menus, again, our cardboard, liquor bottles, all of those items we put into our blue recycling bins. And that's really what comes from our front of house dining rooms. And then all of the food waste and compost is taken back to the kitchen and bussed at dish. And so all of our locations in 14 different cities, we've been able to partner with a composting facility. In Lincoln, Nebraska, we partner with Big Red Worms, who is also able to take all of our food waste, all of our compostable products, our napkins, paper towel, our compostable straws, and he has, maybe some of you have been there or familiar, he has millions of worms that eat those materials and digest it, and the worm poop, the worm castings, is soil, and it's really the most nutrient dense soil that that you can imagine. So it's a really amazing process, and again, that's about 25% of our waste stream. So let's see what else we have. So again, the color coding system is probably number one. Without that, it would be nearly impossible to be able to implement this program on a large scale. And oftentimes with training, we have people say when we open up a new restaurant and we hire 150 new employees for all positions, there's been times in our training classes where I ask the question of, has anyone worked at a place that recycles? And we get maybe 2 or 3 hands out of 150 people. And so let alone a place that composts. And I think it is starting to become more common, which is really great. But there's still a lot of people that are not familiar with this process, especially as aggressive as we do it. So having the very strict color coding system is really the key to success. And you can kind of see our orange buckets for landfill, green buckets for compost. We use the buckets in low volume areas. And so the green buckets are good for behind the bar at times when we want to dispose of our compostable straws or fruit from the bar or napkins and things like that. We don't really need to have a very large compost bin behind the bar. because all of the food waste is taken back to dish to be disposed of in the larger compost bin in the kitchen. So, and then the signage, the education and the signage is definitely the other component that we cannot do without. And this is an example of some of our newer signage. We've gone through quite a few different versions of this, and through trial and error, kind of found what works and what doesn't. And having the images is really crucial. Oftentimes we have language barriers or staff that English is not their first language, and we've been able to create signage that is in Spanish, and we're actually working on possibly a few other languages as well, and that took some time, but I think that it's important to be able to have these available in a way that our staff can easily reference and understand when they're going through a high volume shift and they're focusing in on service and quality and making sure that they're greeting their tables on time and bussing the food and the drinks and everything else that is going on. Separating their waste is usually the last thing that most people want to think about. So these signs really help. And part of my job, aside from the training and education, is to actually visit the facilities that we work with in each area, and every time we open up a new store. And I think that this has definitely taught me a lot, but even more so, I'm able to bring that information back to the stores, back to the management teams, and every facility varies a little bit in terms of what materials they accept or don't accept. And when we first started, one of the most crucial things that we learned was that in the majority of places, recycling is not supposed to be bagged in plastic bags. And a lot of people have that misconception. And unfortunately, when they bag their recycling and it gets to the facility, it can often be taken off of the line and put into the landfill bin or pile. And again, it varies per location, but that's definitely something to be aware of and to ensure that when you're starting, that you have that information so that you're not doing all of that work for nothing. And the other aspect is rinsing out recycling, whether it's a ketchup bottle or a mustard bottle or a Bloody Mary bottle or, anything that has food waste residue needs to be rinsed out, because most recycling facilities, if any, do not have the ability to rinse out every single container that comes through their doors. And so we talk to our staff about this and show them the images of the facilities, and just so they can get an idea of why we cannot bag our recycling and why it's important that we rinse it out. So the other aspect of the program is using all compostable products. And this was, again, really the first thing that we started transitioning into that led us analyzing our waste stream. This is definitely one of the most important pieces of being able to divert 90% of our waste. I think without these, we would have a tougher time reaching that number. And these are really, really cool in a lot of ways, because not only do they break down and can turn back into soil in a commercial composting facility, but they're also made from plants and renewable resources, some of which are made from corn or wheat straw or sugar cane, and a lot of which used to be considered agricultural byproducts and or waste rather, and kind of just discarded to the side. And now manufacturers and scientists and engineers are figuring out ways to make use of that and turn it into something like this. And so these are pretty awesome. And just to go back to composting for a bit, we have different setups at each location, but normally we'll have a 2-yard or a 3-yard dumpster. Ideally, it's green. Some of our locations use carts, like 64-gallon carts or 96-gallon carts. In Lincoln, Nebraska, we have carts for our composting, and those are often really helpful because you can roll them into the restaurant and sometimes set them up at your dish station, and that way you don't have to worry about transferring heavy bags of food waste that might break open, and you can just roll the cart back out to be serviced. So those are really helpful. And the lower middle photo, those are compostable bags filled with our compost, and that's what it looks like when it gets to the facility. And then some of which when they break open the bags, and after about 6 to 8 months, through the hot composting process, it turns back into this nutrient-rich soil that can return back to the farms and the gardens to grow more food. And I, in the last 4 years, have become a huge soil nerd, and these are things that I do try to make it a point to talk to our staff about in training, because before I started studying these things, I never knew how fascinating soil and composting really is. And I just want to, get on top of a mountain and scream it out to the world, because it's truly amazing. But it is astonishing that it actually takes planet Earth about 500 years to replenish 1 inch of topsoil. And we need about 6 inches of topsoil for agricultural production. So we are actually degrading our topsoil on a global scale faster than planet Earth can keep up. So we're not using this resource in a sustainable, renewable way. And even though technically soil is a renewable resource, we're just using it too fast. So over the last 100 years, we've depleted about half of all of the topsoil on this planet. And there's a lot of scientists out there that are trying to ring this alarm and wake people up to this. But it's not really common knowledge that this is happening, or that this is very, very important to future generations and our species as a whole. So it's really exciting that we get to play a role in replenishing this resource. And on top of that, this resource is essentially alive. In one handful of soil, there can be more living organisms in that one handful than there are human beings on planet Earth. Up to 20 billion living organisms in one handful of healthy soil. And it's those organisms that are responsible for making the nutrients in the soil available to the plants. And so when we eat an apple or a carrot or any type of fruit or vegetable, and we're looking for those nutrients, for those vitamins and minerals, most people don't realize that those actually come from the soil. And so without healthy soil, we don't have healthy food. And we've actually seen a very large decrease in the amount of nutrients in our food in the last 50 to 100 years because of this. So, long story short, compost and healthy soil is truly flat gold. And this is a photo from a pile compost facilities that we help to produce. This photo in particular is from Indianapolis, Indiana, where we have a Hopcat location. And it's truly a beautiful thing. So I started to go down the road of trying to figure out what was happening to the soil in different areas and where it was going and how it was being used, who was using it, what was being grown with it. And I started visiting different urban farms and gardens in the locations that we're in. And the one on the top right with the awning there, that is also a photo from Indianapolis, where I kind of stumbled upon this urban farm that I found was using some of the soil that we helped to produce from that previous photo. And I was ecstatic by that thought, and worked with our executive chef in that location to start sourcing some of the products from that farm. And we brought in kale that you see in that photo from their farm into our beer dinner. And we closed that loop for the first time. And that was probably one of the best days of my life, seeing that process unfold. And knowing that if anyone at that beer dinner didn't finish their kale on their plate, that it was then going to be put into our compost bin and go back to the compost facility and turn back into soil. To me, that's the true definition of sustainability, a closed loop system that's working with nature, that isn't, taking from nature, but rather giving back as well. So we started looking further into other farms and gardens in other cities that we're located in. And through this process, we decided to create a collaborative project for Earth Day. And the first one that we did was in 2016. So this is an example of one of the posters and table tents that we had. And we were lucky enough to partner with, at this time, 8 different community gardens or urban farms or tree planting associations that are helping to create productive green space within the urban environments that we're located in. And through the sale of beer, we raised, in 2016, we raised $13,000 for these organizations. And we did it again this year in 2017, and we were able to raise about $15,000 for, I think this year was 12 different organizations. So each year we open up a couple more locations, and each Earth Day moving forward, we'll have the opportunity to partner with more community gardens and urban farms. And so in Nebraska, we partnered with, at that time, it was the Nebraska Farmers Union and Big Red Worms to further the production of the vermicompost and the worm soil that Big Red Worms is helping to make. So that was a pretty cool project, and we're hoping to make it even bigger next year. So the other benefit of that process was that our staff started to get interested, even more interested in this idea, and we were able to help connect them to some of these gardens or farms. And through those few months, we started the conversation of green teams and how we could put together volunteer opportunities or outings for staff that are interested and wanted to get out and do something within their community. And so we've done probably about a dozen different outings now in the last year, and some of them are trash cleanups or river cleanups. Some of them are gleaning at a local farm or helping to build beds. And then a few of them have actually been visiting our recycling facility or compost facility. And this was one of the more recent ones. And this one was in Detroit, where our Detroit Green team put together an outing to go to a local urban farm and help them build beds for planting. So this was a lot of fun. And I think that it helps them to not only learn about this process as a whole, but gets them closer to the dirt, closer to the soil, so that, when they're back in the restaurants and they're trying to figure out, is this compostable or is this recyclable, or trying to train another staff member, I think that it helps to answer those questions, so that they have a better grasp on what is compostable, what's actually going to break down and turn back into soil. So that was a lot of fun. And then this is a compost facility in Lansing, Michigan. Our East Lansing team, our Detroit team, got together and we did a tour of our compost facility, where actually 4 of our restaurants' compost now goes to. So you can see on the right-hand side, behind the staff, there's a pile of our compost in bags that had just gotten tipped out of the truck. And it was just perfect timing. We hadn't planned that, but the truck arrived right when we were taking this photo. And the staff actually got to see their materials arrive at the facility. And we actually broke open a couple bags and we're like looking for contamination. And I think that was a really great learning experience for them. And on the left-hand side is a bunch of pineapple, and that came from a local grocery store through their production facility. And yeah, that was a fun day. We have also started to take our waste diversion initiative into the streets and into festivals and events. Our company hosts the biggest St. Patty's Day festival in the state of Michigan every year. And we block off the streets. There's about a 5-block radius that we take over, and it's like 18 hours long. It's a lot of people. I think last year we had 18,000 people come to this, and I'm responsible for managing the waste stream of those 18,000 people. We hired quite a few volunteers who we incentivized with T-shirts and gift cards and free food and free beer and karma points. And we were able to, let me see here. There it is. We were able to divert about 90% of, I think it was 96% of the total waste stream last year. And without those volunteers, it would not have been possible. But we purchased what's called clear stream bins, and you can see them in the bottom left corner. So we have green compostable frames and lids, and then blue for recycling, and in the middle, the 5-gallon orange bucket that's labeled with a landfill decal. And we also mandate all of the vendors to use compostable products. So that is definitely crucial to the success of the diversion rate. And so that's kind of a blurry photo, but that's what the stations look like before the signage is installed. And they're really lightweight. They're really easy to set up and move around, transport. So these are becoming more common within festivals, and I think a lot of people are starting to get used to seeing these. And so our contamination rates are surprisingly low. But also with that festival, we're able to control all of the outside materials that are coming in, which is a luxury to have for something like this. But the bags are also clear, and so when they start to fill up, people can easily see that the recycling is full of cans, water bottles, and the compostable is filled with like the paper trays, the compostable cups, napkins, and food waste. And so these are a saving grace for festival diversion. And yeah, last year it was 96%, 82%, 96%. Yeah, so we had a 2-yard that was for our landfill waste. And I remember being there from 5 a.m. until about 2 a.m. that day and checking our bins on a regular basis. And I took photos of our landfill bin because it was actually empty. Our 2-yard landfill bin was empty until about 9 o'clock at night. And the festival started at 7 a.m. And it was pretty amazing to see that. But unfortunately, towards the end of the night, we had not only banners are being taken down, different vendors had materials that they just didn't want to haul back or keep for next year. And so they started bringing those materials back to us. And slowly but surely that 2-yard started to fill up with those materials, as well as latex gloves and styrofoam and things like that from the food vendors. And then this photo is of a DJ at the main stage who threw out into the crowd about 500 styrofoam light up wands that you can kind of see in that photo. And everyone was really excited about those wands, and it got the party started. But I was just sitting there shaking my head because I knew that at the end of the night, I was going to be cleaning up those 500 styrofoam light up wands and that they were going to be going to the incinerator. So that was kind of unfortunate, but it just goes to show that you can't always control every aspect of it. It's never going to be perfect, but I think just getting the conversation started, and again, even just starting with cardboard can make a huge difference and can take out a very large percentage of your waste stream and divert it to recycling. So at that festival in particular, those materials in the 2-yard ended up going to the incinerator. So it was completely zero waste to landfill. So we have that again this March, and we'll be looking for volunteers. If anyone's in the state of Michigan and wants to come help out, I'll be there. So aside from that, we have our BarFly Venture Sustainability Report. 2016 is there on the left and 2017 on the right. A little bit of a different design, and just trying different designs out to see what can kind of capture attention within the stores. These are framed and hung in every store. But it's really just a breakdown of numbers and different projects that we have worked on throughout the year. And these are also available on our website, barflyventures.com/sustainability. And I think that is the last slide. So there's my email contact if anyone wants to reach out, autumn@barflyventures.com. I'd be happy to hear from you. And thank you very much for your time.
Autumn, I want to thank you so much for sharing your program with us. It's amazing the work that you guys are doing. I do have a couple of questions for you. The first question is, when you do have a festival, how do you handle the disposal of liquids from plastic bottles? Do people pour them out, or do they just put them in the receptacle?
Yeah, the first year that we did it, we did sell bottled water. and we found that quite a few of them still had water in them. So that was part of our volunteers' work to try to empty as many of those out as they could. That was really time consuming, and I felt bad even asking people to do that. So the next year, we actually eliminated the sale of bottled water, partly because of that, but also on a side note, because of a multi-billion-dollar corporation that is pumping water about an hour north of our home office. They pump 400 or 280 gallons a minute from a well north of here. And there's a lot of controversy over that because they don't pay for the water. And so we're not really big fans of that process. And we decided that we weren't going to purchase or sell bottled water at any of our festivals anymore. So we set up water stations so that our guests could have free water, and we just use compostable cups. So
great. And my next question then is, as far as the restaurant aspect, do you communicate your program with your guests? And if you do, does it make a difference?
We do. And we're trying a few different methods with that, whether it's our sustainability report hanging on the wall or table times on the tables that talk a little bit about the program, or chalkboards hanging behind the bar that say, we strive to compost and recycle 90% of our waste. So we've tried different methods of marketing and communicating this to our guests. And personally, I might be a little biased, but I think that it has made a huge difference in the way that we're perceived. I know that we get a ton of requests for information about the program, whether it's another business looking for contact information for the local hauler or for the compostable products, or organizations like NRC that are interested in educating and training other businesses and community members on waste diversion. So we always try to help out in any way that we can. And I think that our guests in a lot of areas have noticed that and have definitely appreciated that. So I think it's been really beneficial from a marketing standpoint and from a brand value standpoint. But also, I've been told by our CEO that he believes that it's also increased our morale within our staff, and that he thinks that it's also trickled down to our staff retention, and that we have a lower turnover. We have one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry for a company our size. And some of that could be attributed to our sustainability program because our staff appreciates it. They think that we're doing, something different, something good, and that that we're open to the feedback and suggestions to continuously improve. So I think it's been beneficial all around.
And I have another question, Autumn. It is, do you have zero waste events in Lincoln that you need volunteers for so we can help and learn about your great practices with composting?
Oh boy, that is a great question. I am not aware of anything currently scheduled, but I can look into that. That would be interesting. Usually most of our off-premise events are in Grand Rapids, where our home office is, just because we have more resources here to do those types of events. But there may be something in the works. I'll have to check on that. And if there is, I will definitely keep you guys updated so that we can share that information and hopefully get volunteers out.
That's great, Autumn. I appreciate, again, your time and your willingness to share your program. I do not have any other questions at this time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. If anyone has any questions, they can email either Autumn or I. And again, thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.